Well, good morning. Now, today I'm going to look at the very first healing miracle in Mark's Gospel, and it's quite surprising in a number of ways. So I'm going to start by reading it, and it goes like this from the New Revised Standard Version. It's Mark 21 to 28. They went to Capernaum, and when the Sabbath came, he entered the synagogue and taught. And they were astonished at his teaching, for he taught them as one having authority and not as the scribes. Just then there was in their synagogue a man with an unclean spirit, and he cried out, "What have you to do with us, Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come to destroy us? I know who you are, the Holy One of God." But Jesus rebuked him, saying, "Be silent and come out of him." And the unclean spirit, throwing him into convulsions and crying with a loud voice, came out of him. They were all amazed, and they kept on asking one another, "What is this? A new teaching with authority. He commands even the unclean spirits, and they obey him." And at once his fame began to spread throughout the surrounding region of Galilee. So I think the thing that first interests me is that, as this is right at the very beginning of the gospel, that's not an accident. Mark will have put it there for a reason. I don't think any of the gospel writers do anything or write anything without a very good reason for doing so. It's not just a random jumble. And it's interesting to me that this first healing miracle is one of, well, what one might call, or have called at the time, exorcism, the casting out of an unclean spirit. The other thing that's curious about it is that there's repeated reference to Jesus doing things with authority, unlike the normal teachers of the time, and the fact that here the unclean evil spirit recognizes Jesus as the Holy One of God. So it's a kind of revelation that behind the veil of ordinary human affairs there's some sort of cosmic struggle going on. And ironically, it's something that evil spirits notice when ordinary people don't. And the final thing is that even though this healing takes place on a Sabbath, when you weren't supposed to work, nobody seems to be bothered. Even though in other gospel stories, when Jesus heals people on the Sabbath, he gets into a certain amount of trouble, and it's made clear that that's one of the reasons why people were so opposed to him. So I'll come back to that in a minute. But first of all, this casting out of an unclean spirit, what is going on there? Well, I wouldn't want to dismiss the fact that what people call exorcisms sometimes do take place and sometimes can be very effective, and whatever's going on, they can have healing results. However, they can be used irresponsibly as people get sort of whipped up by the idea that they have some sort of wonderful divine power to cast out spirits, and they can do quite a lot of damage if it's unregulated and unlicensed and generally a function of their own narcissistic personality disorder rather than any genuine desire to do the work of God. However, I wouldn't dismiss them, and also, you may be surprised to hear, I wouldn't dismiss the many films in which exorcisms feature, normally horror films. Fun enough, behind these horror films, there is often a powerful Christian ethos going on. You may have noticed if you've seen them, and of course the classic example is the film The Exorcist itself. There is more often than not a Catholic priest who features, and in The Exorcist and in some other films I can't name at the moment, the Catholic priest sacrifices his own life in order to save the unfortunate victim from the demon, as he does in the film The Exorcist. So there is a Christian ethos going on there, and actually, however unpleasant the film may be as it unfolds, very often the result is actually a fairly wholesome one in which somebody gets healed. For of course, exorcism is all about healing. It shouldn't be seen so much, as I say, as a kind of glamorized struggle. It is basically about restoring the world to wholeness, repairing what is broken. And I think that's what's going on here. And when gospel writers, and no doubt other writers of the time, talk about casting out spirits, they're covering a much wider range of issues than actual demonic possession. Very often they're talking about some kind of terrible mental health issue, some awful mental problem. And even sometimes they're referring to good old normal physical organic disease. And in a sense, of course, it doesn't really matter what is actually going on in the way you describe it, because as I say, it's a powerful act of healing. It's making the world restored and back to its wholeness. And if you want to try to define what they will have meant by evil spirits at the time, I suppose they would have talked about invisible life forms of some kind which are harmful to humans. Well, for my mind, that's not only a good definition of bacteria, harmful bacteria, but also most classically of a virus, a mysterious life form. Is it alive or isn't it? And of course, as sadly we're experiencing at the moment, such a thing can be as powerful as the work of any powerful demon as it blights people's lives. So Jesus is coming to heal, and it's a primarily mental, spiritual healing that takes place in this story. There is a cosmic struggle going on. The demons recognize Jesus as something greater than just a wandering rural preacher, teacher, and healer. Here, there is God himself coming to restore and make whole again and to heal his broken world. And I find that a wonderfully comforting message. But moving on, I suppose, to the connected point of Jesus's authority here, this is something which cannot be manufactured. It's just there in him. It's a natural authenticity which ordinary human preachers like me cannot hope to emulate. We don't speak with authority at all, as I've just shown by starting this talk by reading from the Bible that was written by somebody else on somebody else's authority. But this is something that shows Jesus's contemporaries who he really is. All those who are prepared to accept him, of course, the response from others is one of hatred and hostility. And I think this is where a process of discernment is needed, where you try to find out whether what somebody is telling you is authentic and true, whether somebody offering themselves as some sort of Messiah is actually a genuine Messiah or a false one. And this, sadly, at the moment, is a real problem. There are so many voices out there telling us that what I'm saying is true and what everybody else is saying is a lie, and then vice versa, and you simply don't know who is right. The conspiracy theories that are all about the place, are they conspiracy theories or are they actually true? It's very often extremely hard to know, and you need to cultivate a discernment, a wisdom to find out who may actually be telling the truth. And there are ways of doing this, but it often isn't easy. Final point that crops up, occurs to me about this passage that I mentioned, is that it's a healing that occurs on the Sabbath and nobody seems to be bothered. Mark, I think, is leaving out any offense that might have been caused because he wants to focus on something else, not on the fact that Jesus was flouting local tradition in doing things on the Sabbath. That appears in other Sabbath-breaking stories, and there are all sorts of reasons why he does that. Here, I think there's something slightly different going on. In Jewish tradition, there was some sort of idea that the Sabbath wasn't just a day of rest, but somehow, as Jews came to believe in an afterlife, that the Sabbath was a reflection, a mirror, a foretaste, some sort of version of what heaven will be like, of God's kingdom when all is restored. And I don't think it's any accident that this cosmic struggle, this destruction of the powers that blight us mentally, spiritually, and physically, starts occurring on a Sabbath day. Jesus is doing God's work on the Sabbath because the Sabbath will be the day that reflects the glories of heaven, the kingdom of God, where there will be no mental illness, where there will be no physical illness, and the powers of evil will have been put down forever, as humans will be gloriously fulfilled in the way they were originally created to be, and in the way in which Jesus himself came to fulfill them. And I hope your own Sabbath today, if you keep a Christian Sabbath, is a blessed and peaceful one. And may God bless you this day and all the days of your life.